Picture this. It is the year 1397. You are standing in a back room in Florence, Italy. A man named Giovanni is looking at a ledger. He holds the power to bankrupt kings and starve armies. But right now he is shaking. He isn't afraid of the plague. He isn't afraid of assassins. He is terrified of a book, specifically the Bible, because the business he is building, the business that will eventually create the modern world, is a mortal sin. It's called usury, and in 1397, the penalty isn't a fine. It is eternal damnation. Dante's Inferno places bankers in the seventh circle of hell. They sit on burning sand while fire rains from the sky forever. That was the cost of doing business. But the Medici family was about to pull off the greatest heist in history. They weren't just going to break the law. They were going to buy the law. They would take a pirate, make him the Pope, and rewrite the rules of Christianity to legalize their fortune. To understand why you have a credit score today, we have to go back to this terrified man in Florence. Let's look at the trap the world was in. In the 1400s, the Catholic Church controlled 100% of the moral economy. And they were clear. Making money from money was illegal. If you lent $100 and asked for $105 back, you were a heretic. You were denied communion. You were denied a Christian burial. Your body was thrown into a ditch with dead dogs. This was a problem. Europe was. Growing merchants needed capital to buy wool, silk, and spices. But no one would lend money if they couldn't charge interest. The economy was frozen by theology. Enter the Medici. They realized they couldn't change the Bible, but they could change the definition of a loan. They invented a loophole called the Bill of Exchange. Here is exactly how the scam worked. Let's say you are a merchant in Florence. You need 1,000 florins to buy wool in London. The Medici give you the 1,000 florins, but you don't sign a loan document. You sign a currency exchange contract. You promise to pay them back in London in British pounds 90 days later. Here is the trick. The Medici rigged the exchange rate. They valued the florin higher in London than in Florence. So when you paid them back in pounds, you were actually paying back the principal plus about 12%. But on paper, it wasn't interest. It was just currency fluctuation. They argued that God didn't regulate foreign exchange markets, and it worked. Suddenly, the Medici weren't loan sharks. They were international businessmen. But here's where it gets interesting. Giovanni dies in 1429. His son Cosimo de' Medici takes over. And Cosimo is different. He doesn't just want money. He wants power. By 1430, the Medici family is worth 180,000 gold florins. In today's terms, that is purchasing power equivalent to roughly $500 million. They are the richest family in the city. But in a republic, being the richest man is dangerous. It puts a target on your back. The rival family, the Albizzi, decides Cosimo is too big to exist. In September 1433, the trap snaps shut. The Albizzi control the city government. They arrest Cosimo. They drag him to the tower of the Palazzo Vecchio. They lock him in a cell measuring 6 feet by 8 feet. Cosimo knows what comes next: execution or accidental poisoning. For 4 days, Cosimo refuses to eat. He sits in the dark waiting to die. But he has one thing the Albizzi don't have: liquid cash. And he knows how to move it. Cosimo manages to smuggle a message out of the tower. He authorizes a bribe. He pays 1,000 florins to the jailer. He pays another huge sum to the officials running his trial. The sentence is changed from death to exile. He is kicked out of Florence. He goes to Venice, but Cosimo takes the bank with him. This is the moment Florence realized they messed up. The city's tax revenue collapsed by 15% overnight. Projects stopped, credit dried up. The Albizzi realized that without Medici gold, Florence was just a town with nice wool. 1 year later, in 1434, the government begged him to come back. Cosimo returned. He didn't ride in with an army. He rode in with a ledger. He was now the uncrowned king of Florence. So what happens next? Cosimo has the city, but he still has the problem of hell. The church was happy to take his taxes, but they still called him a sinner. Cosimo needed an insurance policy. He decided to gamble on the biggest election in the world, the papacy. At this time, the church was a mess. There were rival factions fighting for the papal tiara. Cosimo found a man named Baldassare Cosa. Now Cosa was not a holy man. He was a former pirate, a soldier, a man accused of running illegal gambling rings. He was the least pope-like candidate you could imagine, but he was ambitious, and he was broke. Cosimo saw an opportunity. He opened the Medici vaults. He funded Cosa's campaign with 10,000 ducats. He bribed cardinals. He paid for votes. It was a massive risk. If Cosa lost, the Medici were finished. But Cosa won. He became Pope John the 23rd, and the first thing he did? He made the Medici the gods' bankers. This was the monopoly of the century. Think about the scale. Every parish, every bishop, every diocese in Europe had to send money to Rome, fees for marriages, taxes on land, payments for indulgences, millions of gold coins moving across the continent, and all of it moved through the Medici Bank. The Medici took a commission on every transaction. They were the PayPal of the Middle Ages, but more importantly, the Pope's backing gave them spiritual immunity. Who was going to arrest the Pope's personal banker for heresy? No one. The pirate became the Pope, and the banker became untouchable. And then everything changed. With the money secure, Cosimo had to clean his conscience. He was getting old. He suffered from gout. He started thinking about the burning sand in the seventh circle of hell. Again, he went to the new Pope Eugenius IV and asked for a price. How do I make things right with God? The Pope's answer was simple: spend money on the church. This brings us to the restoration of San Marco. This wasn't a donation. It was a transaction. Cosimo poured 40,000 florins into rebuilding the monastery of San Marco. That's about $25 million today. He didn't just fix the roof. Fra Angelico Michelozzo. He built the first public library in Europe since the Roman Empire. But look closely at the walls. Inside the monastery, Cosimo had his personal cell built. It was a small room for prayer, but above the door he had the Pope inscribe a guarantee, a receipt of forgiveness. Cosimo had literally laundered his sins through architecture. This sparked the Renaissance. We often think the Renaissance was about art for art's sake. It wasn't. It was guilt. The Duomo, funded by interest rates, Donatello's sculptures, paid for by currency arbitrage. Cosimo realized that if he made the city beautiful, the people, and maybe God, would forgive how he made the money. He turned patronage into a political weapon. When people walked past the cathedral, they didn't see God's house. They saw the Medici's generosity. He branded the entire city with his name, which brings us to the data. By 1460, the Medici Bank was an octopus. They had branches in London, Geneva, Bruges, Avignon, Milan, and Rome. They were clearing a net profit of roughly 20,000 florins a year. This doesn't sound like much compared to modern billions. But in an era where a mansion cost 1,000 florins, it was infinite wealth. Cosimo was wealthier than the kings he lent to, but there was a crack in the foundation, the king problem. Just like the Fuggers later on, the Medici fell into the trap of sovereign debt. Cosimo was smart. He knew kings were bad borrowers. Kings have armies, bankers do not. If a king doesn't want to pay you back, he just banishes you. Cosimo had a strict rule. Never lend to princes, but his successors forgot this rule. After Cosimo died in 1464, the bank began to drift. His grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, was a brilliant politician, but he was a terrible banker. He let the branch managers get sloppy. They lent massive sums to Edward IV of England. They lent to the Duke of Burgundy. These rulers used the money to fight wars. They lost the wars, and they defaulted on the loans. The Medici liquidity crisis began by 1494. The bank was insolvent. The French army invaded Florence. The Medici were exiled. The mob looted the palace and burned the ledgers. The greatest financial engine of the century stalled out. So what is the legacy? The bank collapsed, but the system remained. Cosimo de' Medici did something more important than make money. He secularized the economy. Before him, money was a moral issue. After him, money was a utility. He proved that banking was necessary for civilization to function. Today, the global bond market is worth $133 trillion. Every single one of those dollars moves on the principles. Cosimo established risk collateral and the belief that time is money. We don't worry about the seventh circle of hell anymore. We worry about inflation and interest rates. The theology has shifted, but the altar is the same. Which brings us to the final question. Cosimo spent the last years of his life depressed. He supposedly closed his eyes and said, "In 50 years, nothing will remain of my house." He was wrong about his house. The Medici produced 2 more popes and 2 queens of France, but he was right about the cost. He unleashed a system where everything, even salvation, has a price tag. Looking at the modern economy, where debt fuels everything from your house to your government, did Cosimo liberate us? Or did he just build a different kind of prison? Which side are you on? Was the Renaissance worth the corruption? Drop your verdict in the comments below. And subscribe to see if you're right when we break down the 2008 housing market collapse next week. Because the numbers change, but human nature never does.